This presentation starts our new topic on classification. In your textbook, The One with the Dragonfly on it, this is chapter 20. So take a minute and jot this down, and let's get some basics about this. Okay, one question might be, well, why do we have to classify things? Well, some books estimate there's been 2 million different species identified so far by scientists. You don't need to write that down. But if you had 2 million of anything, you would need a logical way to organize them and talk about them and put them together based on what's similar between them, and that's why classification is needed. Some scientists say that there are millions and millions of more creatures that have yet to be discovered, and we also have to account for all of the creatures that aren't here anymore that we have fossilized evidence for. So we need a logical way to group living things based on similarities so they can actually be studied and compared, and we can learn more from them. Okay, so this is exactly what we had said. I really don't think you need anything from this slide. I'm just trying to let you know why this is something that people study, why it's an entire chapter in our textbook, and why I think as a biology student you need to know how biologists classify living things. Okay, now this is where I need to write some things down. The technical term for classifying organisms is called taxonomy. So this is a vocab word that you can expect to see on your final exam. Taxonomy is the branch of biology concerned with identifying, naming, and classifying organisms. Okay, there have been a lot of different ways that scientists have classified organisms over the years. The earliest system goes back to Aristotle. He divided basically animals up into 3 groups. He divided them up into land animals, water animals, and air animals. That system sort of works, but not really, because you get something like a frog that begins life as a tadpole that's in water. Then it goes through metamorphosis and becomes a frog and lives its life on land. And then it returns back to water again to lay eggs. So does that become land, or does that become water? So a system's not good if you have creatures where you can argue where they belong, if a creature goes in 2 different groups. So that wasn't really the best system. Aristotle also only had 2 bigger groups than that. He had plants and animals. Well, we know now in 2018, there's more than just plants and animals. There's bacteria, there's archaea, there's fungus, there's these things called protists. So just based on the amount of creatures we know, we need more than just those kinds of groups. So let me tell you who came up with the first system, and we've had them modified over the years because when this scientist developed this, we still didn't really understand everything, but we use the framework of his system to classify organisms today. Okay, so write down this guy's name. Carolus Linnaeus. Alright, he looks like he belongs on like a dollar bill or something like that. But let's learn a little bit about Linnaeus, and we're actually going to use his system with some modifications as we discover new creatures to classify organisms. Okay, so write that down about Linnaeus. He developed the modern system of classification and how we name creatures. So he actually came up with 2 things. Okay, he came up with naming system and classification system as well as naming system. And we're going to learn about both. And they're both easy to understand. A couple vocab words here and there. But this will be good for the final exam to have some of this stuff on it, because you guys will do really well on it. You don't need to know dates, but I just want you to know what era we're talking about here. So he was in England. This was, obviously the time when the United States was colonies and then declared our independence. So that's about the time he was working. and this is huge. You gotta write this one down. Linnaeus based his system based on similarities in body structure. Now, that's really important, and it sounds just like it's common sense, but it wasn't really at the time, because different people were classifying creatures in different ways. Think about what Aristotle did. He had a land group, he had an air group, and he had a water group. Alright, this doesn't work super well, and we said why. This is basically based on habitat, and then you have to decide, alright, well, if I'm doing like an alligator, what habitat am I using here? Are they land or are they water? Using this system also puts something like a mosquito and an eagle in the same group. Guys, a mosquito and an eagle, they're both animals, but their wings are completely different, and so are their bodies. So the fact that they both fly really shouldn't put them in the same group, and then we consider them pretty much super similar. Okay? So what Linnaeus did was he looked at the bodies of creatures and how they were set up and what parts they had, and he used that to put them into groups, and that just makes a lot more sense. So something like an eagle goes into a group with other birds and other birds of prey, whereas a mosquito goes into a group with other insects. So this is why this makes a lot of sense. Even though it was developed in the 1700s, we've added to it, but his basic framework is still what we use. Alright, so let's talk about a system. Let's talk about what you need to know about it. Okay, write this one down. His system is hierarchical. I'm not sure if that's a real word, but I'm trying to say it's a hierarchy. It's a series of levels. And as you work your way through the levels, creatures would have more in common or less in common. You're going to see what I mean in just a minute here. Our school district is like a hierarchy. You have the school board at the very top. You have Dr. Mahan, is under their authority. And then you have Mr. Wine as the assistant superintendent. And then you get all the building level principals and the assistant principals, and then you get the teachers, and then you get you guys, and that's sort of like the hierarchy of our school district. Well, that's what I mean by a hierarchy. It's a series of levels as we go through. Okay, so write this one so you know what I mean by hierarchy. It's groups and subgroups that get more specific as you go down. You gotta know this one too. Each of those groups is called a taxon. And that's where we get the word taxonomy. Okay? The study of these groups. Alright. A taxon is a group of organisms that fills a particular category. Okay, so as we look through, like, if we go back up to this simple picture here, the school board would be a taxon. Superintendent would be a taxon. So a taxon's a group. Okay? And our modern system has 8 taxons. When Linnaeus first developed this, he didn't have 8. When I went through school, there was only said to be 7. But because of DNA evidence, we've added a taxon to show that creatures can be similar or different based on their DNA. And I'm going to show you these taxons. I'm going to give you another few seconds to copy all that down. Okay, here are the 8 taxons. And take a minute and write them down. If you wanted to write them left to right, that's fine. If you want to write them top to bottom, that's fine too. This is how you pronounce these. Up top is domain, and then kingdom, and then phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. Okay, you've heard of species before. We know what families mean. It's a group of related, people or organisms. So let's just kind of figure out what's meant by all this stuff. Up top, domain is the most general. And as you progress down through these, you get more and more specific until you get to the most specific. and that would be a species. So two creatures that are in the same species have the most things in common. Two creatures that are in the same domain have very little in common. Now let me give you an example. There's actually 3 domains. So every living creature that's ever been, or that we've ever known about, goes into one of these 3 domains, okay? One is called the archaea. One is called the bacteria. And one is called the eukarya. Okay, so write this down so you have this good example. We're not going to study the archaea or the bacteria too much. Archaea are broken down into a kingdom called the Archaebacteria, and it gets further broken down into phylum and classes and orders and all the way down to species. Bacteria would be a similar thing. For the eukaryotes like us, though, here's some stuff that you've heard of before. There are actually 4 kingdoms of eukaryotes, okay? There's these things called protists. There are fungus. There are plants. And there are animals. Let me get rid of some of this junk here. Okay, so these are the kingdoms of the domain eukarya. Okay, let's look at animals for a minute. Animals get broken down into different phyla. Okay, there are 13 different animal phyla. We as humans, we belong to one called vertebrates. Actually, it'd be chordates, because we have a spinal cord. Okay, and then all the chordates get broken down into different classes. We go into a class called vertebrate, and it keeps on going down. So if you're a chordate with another creature, say like us and your dog, well, then you have some things in common. Okay, you have more in common with your dog than you do with the plants over by the window. The reason why is you are in the same class as your dog. If we're talking that vertebrate, you're in the same phylum as your dog. But plants, you only have domain in common. Okay, because we're in the eukarya domain with them, but different kingdoms. So the more of these levels you have in common, the more related you are. Okay, let me show you a better example of this. Here, we'll come back to this one. Take a look at these 2 cats. Okay, now this one's missing one. This one's missing domain. You don't need to write this. So they're both in domain eukarya. If you take a look, we have a bobcat and a lion. They're both in the animal kingdom. They're both in this chordata. They have a spinal cord phylum. Okay, chordata gets broken down into different classes. There's a reptile one, a fish one, there's amphibian ones, but these are in the same mammal ones. Okay, of all the mammals there are, these are the carnivores. Okay, of all the carnivores there are between wolves and everything else, these are both felines. But here's where they differ. Of all the feline animals, this bobcat goes into one called lynx, which are kind of smaller cats, whereas lions go into the same one as tigers and mountain lions, maybe, and things like that. Panthers, large cats. And then this one has a species called Leo. This has a species called Rufus. I don't know what that means, but that's what it is. So what this means is, because these share domain, kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, they're really closely related, but they're not the same thing. Remember, a species is a group of creatures that can mate and make fertile offspring. They are not in the same species. Okay? They're not even in the same genus. So they're related to a point, but they are different based on these levels. Okay? Now let me give you a little help here. You need to know these in order, from generic to most specific. If you can remember this goofy little sentence, and if you can make a better one up, go ahead. But to write this down, if you can remember, do kings play chess on funny green stools? You remember the taxons in order, from the most general to the most specific when you have one kind of organism. So domain, kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. Do kings play chess on funny green stools? Alright, so feel free to rewind this, take a look at some other stuff, and we'll talk more about this next class.